All right, I'm glad you're still with us here on Morning at NTV, and we are now transitioning into our Kickstarter segment. We are going to be analyzing the biannual reports of the Inspector General of Government to Parliament, including efforts that are geared at digitizing the fight against corruption. Interesting developments here in Uganda. Digitizing the fight against corruption is one endeavor that ought to succeed if the corruption hemorrhage is to be done away with. Before I introduce my guests this morning, just a preamble on this particular aspect. In fulfillment of Article 231, Section 1 of the Constitution, which mandates the IGG to submit to Parliament at least once every 6 months a report on the performance of its functions and make recommendations for the efficient performance of public institutions, the Parliamentary Commissioner, Honourable Esther Afoyochan, on behalf of the Speaker, received biannual reports of the IG last week. The reports cover the period January to June 2022, July to December 2022, and January to June 2023. In perspective, about 7.9 billion Uganda shillings has been recovered within this time frame. However, corruption continues, and hence the emphasis on the digitization of the fight against the vice. I have with me in the studio Dr. Sarah Bireete. She is the Executive Director at the Center for Constitutional Governance and a seasoned political commentator. Many thanks for coming again.
Thank you for inviting me, and good morning, viewers.
And you're most welcome, Counsel George Musisi. You represent the National Unity Platform.
A pleasure to be here. Good morning, viewers, and good morning to you, Chris and Sarah.
In today's discussion, I want the counsel in you, not the representative of National Unity Platform.
I'm here to give my views.
It's both.
No, but by virtue of political business, sometimes there is the overlap. In my preamble, I saw something that caught my eye: the presentation of 3 reports, when each ought to be handed in as a concrete entity. First and foremost, what caused what appears to be an anomaly? This one will go to Sarah Bireete.
Well, it's true that the IGG is supposed to be reporting to Parliament every 6 months. And the current IGG, Honourable Beth Kamyawa, with her team, were appointed in July 2021. Ideally, they should have settled in office and been able to report properly in the year 2022 and going forward. So when they do omnibus reporting, bringing 3 reports at a go to Parliament, one, it means that they have defaulted on the reporting timeline as envisaged in the Constitution, but they are also putting Parliament in an awkward position where they might not give sufficient attention to each of the reports. But it's also important to note that previously Parliament has sometimes ignored IGG reports and they go undebated. So I don't know whether, but even if that is the situation, the IGG's office has a constitutional mandate to report every 6 months, and they need to deal with the lapses. But overall, Honourable Beth Kamya's team has slightly improved the performance of the office of the IGG. There is improvement in terms of public awareness and engagement, because we know that citizens are very critical and #1 constituency in the fight against corruption. They have improved the whistleblower mechanism, including a bit of rewards for the whistleblower where money is recovered, and that is encouraging to the citizens to report. They have also become more vigilant, for the whole functions of IGG, because their function is not just the accountability and transparency issues. It includes values and promoting good governance in the functioning of public office, and there's a slight improvement. So we need to congratulate them and encourage them to do better.
Okay, interesting there. When an official in one of the public institutions in government gets a clean bill of health from Dr. Sarah Bireete. Counsel Musisi, a presentation of 3 reports in an omnibus nature creates a dilemma, especially when it comes to debating it on the floor of Parliament, or even causing the fact that some of the recommendations that could be in these reports are actually worked on. If Sarah Bireete's words are anything to go by, some of these reports are not debated by Parliament. This is a dilemma.
Certainly it poses a challenge to Parliament, because it's envisaged under the laws that when the reports are, why the IGG reports to Parliament is that Parliament can pick up those recommendations, which may require either oversight or even legislative action. Is it a problem with the law? Is it such that they can debate them?
That's right.
Whereas I don't know what could have posed the challenge, maybe they were just settling into office. Presenting them omnibus certainly means that they'll create some bit of backlog. Chances are that, because some of the problems we've been grappling with, even when they present one report, it takes long. Some are never reported. So if we present 3, it's even a bigger challenge. But yes, like Sarah said, I would like also maybe to surprise you, Chris, to upload the to upload that. I think there's
interesting there.
There have been efforts.
There
have been efforts. I think from where the last team, the previous team of Justice Nyagonja left it, the team of Honorable Betty Kamya, Anne Muhiri, and Dr. Akiria. I think there have been efforts. We've seen local government people being arrested. We've seen them all over the country. Because the fight against corruption, it's more about perception as well. The public should know that IGG is moving around.
That is right.
But yes, the presenting of the 3 reports, there are high chances that they will not get the requisite attention by Parliament. That's what the law envisages, and we may not get action on them by Parliament.
Okay. Pursuant to Article 231, subsection 3 of the Constitution, the Speaker will cause the reports to be laid in the House at the very next sitting of the House after the current recess. Interesting. Thereafter, the reports will be referred to the Parliamentary Committee on Legal and Parliamentary Affairs for scrutiny. How effective is this system when looking at already you've decried the fact that some reports are not discussed, and these ones could also suffer the same fate? But let's take a scenario where every report is discussed in its entirety, and then if need be, whatever recommendations are in that report are actually attended to. How has this happened in the past?
Well, I think Parliament as an institution and as a temple of democracy in our kind of arrangement under the doctrine of separation of powers has largely rendered itself as a mere advisory body. Their decisions are ignored.
Okay.
They have previously censured ministers who are still serving in cabinet. They
ministers who have been exonerated.
No, even the ones they censured are still serving in cabinet. They take recommendations that are largely ignored or contested. I think the only decision that they took and put their feet down was on the Pinetti coffee deal. But to look at scandals like Rubowa Hospital, look at things like the Kosase report of Uganda Airlines, where Parliament undermined its own authority. So I think Parliament has not commanded enough respect to be able to function as envisaged in our Constitution. The executive finds it easy to ignore Parliament, where the institutions, their interests are not aligned. And given that kind of stance, I mean, all their reports are not acted on, including the Karamoja Iron Sheet scandal. They ordered for the resignation of some MPs. On NSSF, they ordered the resignation of some ministers. They were ignored. Karamoja, they did the same. They were ignored. So I don't think Parliament has clearly asserted itself to demand authority and respect from the executive as an equal arm of government. They are working as a subsidiary of executive, and usually doing what pleases the executive And in the process, they have undermined their authority and are not respected. So whether they debate the report or not, can any action be taken? No. Look at the accountability. There are three accountability committees in Parliament. The Public Accounts Committee, COSASE, and the local government.
Yeah.
Which report has ever been acted on? Now Public Accounts Committee is no longer even heard of. The citizens rarely hear.
There's been a bit of a lull,
yes,
on the case.
So I don't expect that whether IGG reports are debated or not, there will be any difference.
One out there watching and listening could say the reason perhaps the accountability committees are not as busy as they ought to be is a reduction in cases of corruption.
The bigger issue, Chris, is the politics of the day sometimes affects both the working of Parliament and even the working of the operations of the IGG.
That's right.
The bigger question is their will to fight corruption by the government.
You tell us.
I don't think so. I don't think so. Let me give you 3 examples, starting with the IGG. We've seen times when the IGG has attempted to move in particular direction. The Act gives that office a lot of powers. You look at issues of declarations. What Betty Kamia came out and said, I'm coming up with what did she call that?
A lifestyle
audit.
Yeah.
Actually, the lifestyle audit, she was just using other words. It's there in the Act. What they
How
call
is it described in the Act?
In the Act that, Chris, if you should be living commensurate to your earnings. If we see you driving a Mercedes-Benz 2023, yet you earn 500,000, you should be able to explain. The burden comes on to you to explain how did you acquire this. So the Act, the reason why they
small investments.
yeah, it's now the duty now is on you.
If you are a public servant, you explain your other sources.
And that's why they tell leaders to make declarations of their assets and properties. In fact, the IGG is even given powers to order if there is a rumor that this property is owned by Chris, but Chris didn't declare it. The IGG can order the bank, can get an order, yes, can get secret orders, seizure of documents, even from bank statements. They have all those powers.
That's right.
So you remember what the president told the IGG when she was launching the lifestyle audit, said, please go slow on these people. The Act gives her the office powers.
Go slow on my thieves.
Go slow on my thieves. At least they're investing the money
scare
here.
the money.
I saw a letter where the president had written that no, the police officers and classified expenditure, sorry, army officers, please leave that.
Yeah, that army should not declare.
Yes, which is outside the law because the IGG has powers to go over those. So the question is there will to fight corruption? And this goes back to what Sarah was saying about Parliament. Why those accountability committees, why have they been demoralized? They have been deliberately, both by the executive, even sometimes by the Parliament itself, by the leadership of Parliament. It was the Speaker who came on the floor and said, no, Uganda Airlines report leaked, we shall not discuss it. And the report which was allegedly leaked had been distributed to over 500 MPs. How can you say that has been leakage? So I don't think there is will. The politics sometimes of who is being investigated supersedes any other intentions to fight corruption. And that's why the IGG's work sometimes is undermined, even Parliament's work is undermined. And if there is no will to fight corruption, I don't think that the efficacy of all these reports, no matter how good they are, and that's why some people say you always go for the small fish. Yes, it's easy to arrest the cow here, to arrest the local government, which is it's also okay because they are let them be subject to the due process. But sometimes, like I said, corruption is about perceptions. If you have a bigger scandal like Lubowa, can IGG just 3 days ago journalists were arrested for criminal trespass because they were taking pictures at Lubowa? So there are those elephants in the room which no one can dare touch, and certainly it portrays a picture in the public that maybe the fight has untouchables and those who can be easily swayed away.
Well, just to add on this, especially the recovery of 7.9 billion, the IGG has presented a report that this country loses 10 trillion every year. 10 trillion is a fifth of our budget. So when she does investigations in 2 years, and she can only net 38.7 billion, and out of that, 7.9 is recovered over 1.5 years. It shows the magnitude of the work she needs to do. she has herself authored that we lose 10 trillion. So if you fail to even recover, because this is less than 1%, if you fail to recover a tangible amount of money lost to corruption, then her office is also, as much as there's an improvement, she has a lot of work to do.
Sarah Bireete is recalling her bill of health.
No, I'm not.
You talked about perception, and the IGG has many times played very well when it comes to the public relations of the fight against corruption. But there are aspects including the tendency to appeal to those that have been found to either misappropriated or simply siphoned money to return it in phases. You know, it kind of gives the picture that if I steal, I will be given all the time I need to invest that money wherever I want to invest it, and then I can pay back slowly. She says it's a very effective way of recovering money, away from requiring people to either go to jail and then you don't see anything. There are people who are willing to be in jail.
I disagree with her, and yes, I agree with you. She has really promoted that kind of work method, saying that, you know, I've reached agreements. They're even non-disclosure sort of agreements. It doesn't disclose when the people enter into those agreements. First of all, I don't think it's a very effective system in terms of fighting corruption, because if you're saying someone has caused financial loss of 10 billion, and then you say that you have reached an agreement,
there is acknowledgement from all parties
to return this money in a phased manner. This agreement will not be disclosed to the public. This is taxpayers' money, meanwhile, will not be disclosed to the public, because the intention of making the act and all these offenses punitive was also to send a deterrent message.
That is right.
How will you send a message if people say that, no, we can reach an agreement for as long as, because it's different from a plea bargaining agreement, for instance, which court reaches with some accused persons, because one, that is public, then two, the person is serving a punishment. It may be reduced, but serving a punishment. But the IGG has taken a mode that it's more effective to recover that way. Yet actually the act empowers her to recover in many other ways. That is right. In many other ways, including seizure of properties of convicts, or even people, if they're facing trial, the IGG can get temporary orders from court to seize. So for me, I don't think that would send a deterrent message. I think actually it might work in reverse in encouraging, like you've said, that if I steal 2 billion and I can invest it in a couple of years, if I'm arrested, I can reach some sort of agreement with IGG. So for me, I think that she has not effectively used, and like all these institutions, yes, I know there are things that are beyond her operations. For instance, I don't think her employer seriously believes in the work of the IGG. I don't think the president believes so much in the work of the IGG. You've seen him appointing, why would you appoint anti-corruption unit? Then General Nakalema now heads investors. Oh, this work should be merged. The IGG is saying we don't have enough money. And then you are spending, we're giving General Rusoke this amount, because they're doing the same work. In any case, they're not constitutional bodies. IGG is a constitutional body. They have powers to prosecute. They have powers to initiate their own investigations, but then you're creating an anti-corruption unit which is well facilitated. You're creating investors protection unit which is well facilitated. Yet you have the constitutional body doesn't have. So I think, yes, she has been undermined, but maybe the president doesn't believe they have the bite. But the work method she has adopted, I don't think that it will serve the purpose of acting as a deterrent.
Okay, we shall wait out her tenure, and of course the reports will also be out on how exactly she gets to do her job. I just want to capitalize on what he says and come to you. The multiplicity of agencies fighting corruption, in a way, kind of, again, make it hard for corruption to be dislodged. Because you have two agencies within the confines of State House. There is the IGG, and then you can find another actor also working pretty well because they are aligned to State House. When all this happens, it's of course something that says, or like Counsel claims, that the principal at the top does not believe that the agencies that he appoints, including the IGG, actually are doing the job, wants them to do the job. How do we move to the point where it's all aligned, because we hear government wants to do some alignment in terms of MDAs and agencies and stuff like that. You're creating new ones while telling people that we are going to merge. How is this going?
Well, the multiple centers for fighting corruption is one way of undermining the fight. The president has been on record. I will just quote two speeches. One was a speech before Chogam, when we hosted the Commonwealth heads of state and government. 2007. Yes, he was meeting accounting officers, and he said, and there was a demand for salary increment. He said, I know civil servants fundraise from their budgets. A public speech. Then during the anti-corruption walk, he thought he would walk corruption out of Uganda without walking the talk. And then he stopped the lifestyle audit. So when you create institutions, undermine them by creating duplicate centers, the institutions cannot function as envisaged in the Constitution. And that act is deliberate to undermine the working. It could be helping, because there are some people who have had reliefs under the State House, the widows being grabbed, chased out of homes and arrested. There are people who have had reliefs in that office, but the efforts should be consolidated and put under a constitutional body, not creating unconstitutional entities, regardless of the work they are doing, whether it's good or bad. But when it comes to, I want to bring in a bit of a pre-bargain principle in the fight against corruption. When the IGG extends that room to say, you can refund the money. I think for me the two gaps in that process is these people should be made public because they are public officers. Sure. Two, the pre-bargain agreement should also be public. So because why hide them, and they should leave office? So the question of non-disclosure, you don't even know whether they are keeping in the offices they abused or not.
Well, of course, what I know is that some of those that have been found to have taken or misappropriated money, it's a language that is chosen, they never steal, they misappropriate the money, have continued to work and are in office.
That's an abuse in itself.
Let's go for a break. We are discussing the biannual reports from the Inspector General of Government to Parliament. How are they effective in fighting corruption, and the processes of debate, including the very latest 3 that have been handed in omnibus nature. We shall be returning and understanding what exactly MPs can do to accelerate debate on that to Parliament, and how best this can entrench the fight against corruption. Are we registering any dividends, or is it a case of 1 step forward and 2 steps backwards? In the studio, I have with me the Executive Director at the Center for Constitutional Governance, seasoned political commentator, Dr. Sarah Bireete, and Counsel George Musisi. He is an official with the National Unity Platform, but we are glad to hear exclusively his legal expertise on the show this morning. There's a gentleman who told me, why don't you want me to speak on the other half? I'm like, well, for the day's discussion, that's not part of it. However, as we shall be finishing the show, people will need to understand exactly who you are, which will be a good thing for you, no doubt about that. Talking about these particular reports, within the workings of Parliament, we've seen when committees are sitting, it's an elaborate process. You know, cameras and stuff like that. That's as if cameras are allowed in. When you have 3 reports, that means you need to do accelerated scrutiny, even before the debate itself. I do not know whether your knowledge, and this one will go to both of you, your knowledge of the workings of Parliament, whether it can actually be achieved by either the Speaker saying, since we have a scenario that we have omnibus reports, this is how I'm going to direct the chairpersons of the committees to ensure that scrutiny is done. Is it possible within the workings of Parliament?
Certainly they have the powers. They have the powers, because business is set by the business committee and then it's broken down to the committees. The challenge is, one, whether there is time for that. because if you take an example of the previous reports, that one of the IGG, those reports that are supposed to, as a matter of law, lead to Parliament, IGG, Human Rights Commission, the Auditor General, many times Parliament discusses them in a backlog way. 2023 they're discussing the Auditor General's report of 2022, 2021, and even then they don't do it exhaustively. So one, there is no time. Secondly, sometimes there's even no will. You know, the nature of our law. For instance, you have the IGG reporting to Parliament. Yet the IGG is also supposed to hold political leaders, even MPs, to account. Yeah. In the past, we've seen IGG's office clashing with MPs. We saw it. Honorable Chams had to go all the way up to the Supreme Court. We saw, because MPs are supposed also to file declarations. So sometimes the suspects, quote unquote, are the ones supposed to sit in judgment to discuss and accelerate these reports. One time we saw a standoff between the Honorable Muliagonja Justice and Honorable Kadaga over, and the right speaker had to remind the IGG that the Constitution says you're supposed to be an office of Parliament. That's why you report to us. So how would the MP, for instance, the IGG, hold the chairperson of an accountability committee if he's the one who has failed to declare, or possibly? So sometimes those are inconsistencies in the law that possibly, because if you have to create a powerful ombudsman, you should make it semi-independent, maybe only accountable to the judiciary, because the judiciary is the arbiter. It's the arbiter of all of us. But if you are making it a report to Parliament, which Parliament is also supposed to make declarations and possibly be found at fault, they may not be the will by Parliament themselves to debate these reports.
Sarah Bireete doesn't have any kind words than that.
No, I think last year the Speaker of Parliament directed the committees to debate Auditor General's reports, omnibus. And the MPs were protesting that they don't have enough time for proper scrutiny. I can see the same happening with the IGG reports. If at all they will be debated, they will be debated omnibus, and it will just be a tick box exercise.
Looking at the workings of Congress in the United States, some of the senators and the representatives, when they go and come out with these very magnificent pieces of legislation, it is pretty much the work of the Chief of Staff and the team behind. I know Ugandan MPs cannot command staff of, say, 5 policy researchers and to help in some of this work. But recommendations that are in such reports can be studied exclusively by some of these experts who work within the confines of Parliament, and then very compacted or edited final wordings are availed to these MPs, and then a committee can come up with something. Is it something that can work?
It's not even a matter of absence of support staff. Parliament has a huge
staff.
Research department.
They have enough staff.
You may find that these MPs don't even use them. For me, there are 2 things. One, the will, but also competence issues. Most of the MPs I don't have the competence.
Yeah, I was going to ask, when it comes to scrutinizing these reports, I am a journalist. We are not the smartest people. We struggle when it comes to reading some of the things. And then you realize that an MP who might not be, and this one I must be very candid, as smart as they ought to be, is required to read a document as big as 2,500 pages in 3 nights. Aren't we setting ourselves up as a nation?
Well, we set standards in the Constitution. The requirement for one to be a member of Parliament or minister or even president is a mere senior 6 or equivalent. We have dilly-dallied in upgrading that very low standard. So it's a standard we set for ourselves as a country, that policymakers, political leaders, important officers, the qualification is a basic senior 6 or its equivalent.
It's equivalent.
So when you are operating at that standard, and you can see the clashes, the leader of government business, the Prime Minister, one time said it is hard to supervise over-educated people. And you can see the failure the failure of Parliament in terms of coordinating executive function, the failure of ministers to show up, the failure of chief whip, and the failure of leader of government business. Yet the 90% of work in Parliament comes from executive. So when you have that basic standard, then it affects the overall functioning of government.
I one time had a professor who described Uganda's condition as a chronically systemic social and political disequilibrium. He used a lot of words, and to this day, every time I hear the disconnect between competence, and I revert to that. But if the people who are competent or seen to be or supposed to be also act like they are incompetent, should we blame the incompetent?
I think there's been a deliberate plan to have the political class deliberately disempowered. Okay. And either through appointments, those political appointments, even through the electorate themselves. I remember there was a time when Professor Nsibambi said he couldn't subject himself to an election because he could easily lose to a village drunkard. Dr. Baddo Chigundu, a professor, stood in 2001, I think, and he lost in Kawempe. They said in Luganda, we were professor Mino Rugezigezi. So, one, it's been a deliberate, and I think even the electorate has lowered their standards. They can easily elect, Christians easily lose to a person who attends burials at the village, to go to Parliament, as if Parliament is a funeral home or something like that. So, and then if you look at the appointments of the presidential appointments, sometime where you have Honorable Nabanja, with the greatest of respect, superintending over Rebecca Kadaga, sometimes it's meant to disempower. It's meant to disempower you as a... So, even these MPs, they don't have either the competence or even, and it's been deliberate. I don't think they are appointed to work. I don't think they are there to work. So this may not be as bad as it is. The electorate has lowered their standards, and because, like I told you, the politics has taken over. That Parliament, if you are the speaker, if you are the deputy speaker, your role is not there to do what you're supposed to do under the Parliament, but you have been given you to be there for politics.
Take the book.
All right. Lady and gentlemen, I'm out of time, but I will give a minute to each of you. What's your take on Uganda's performance at the United Nations General Assembly?
Well, I think again we took a delegation that can easily be regarded as a laughingstock. 71-man-woman delegation to a meeting of the UN in a situation where we are struggling financially, where the leaders are preaching frugality, and the president has been on several occasions saying he has put a ban on travel. But government travel is approved by the Prime Minister. So even the issue of dual delegations, she could have decided that she also wants to go. And they talk of a parallel invitation, because government is supposed to run in a coordinated manner. But it is all largely because of incompetence. My worry, though, is that it seems the cabinet has started ignoring the orders of the president. Because the president has ordered no travel, cut travel, leave embassies to work, but his cabinet has ignored him, meaning that he's losing a grip over his own cabinet, and that is worrying.
Counsel?
It's not any different from what really, this is just a symptom of the many things that happen, how public affairs are run. It's the incompetence that creeps through. Yes, we took the biggest delegation, or among the biggest. But then the other issue is, if you've taken them, what have they achieved?
But what did they go to do?
Hey, I'm not a fan of people who compare neighboring countries.
Meetings on the sidelines.
I'm not. Yes, but if you look at some of our neighbors, if you look at President Ruto, at least even if it's just simply for the optics, I think the closest thing I came was Vice President Alupo meeting the President of Burundi. and delivering His Excellency's President that message. So for me, I think it's not any different from what we see.
Are being too brutal?
She also met the UN Chief,
Okay.
the UN Secretary General, but was it necessary?
Interesting there. Sarah Bireete, many thanks for the perspective, and many thanks to you too, George Musisi, for helping us understand the workings of the reports by the IGG to Parliament and whether the fight against corruption can actually be achieved in that way. That will do it for this particular discussion, the Kickstarter. I'm trying to get in touch with my colleague, Ivan K. Walunyolo, who is standing by in Entebbe, talking to residents or officials there with regard to some of the aspects around Kajansi municipality and apparent funding basket that that particular municipality gets. A very good morning, Ivan.
Well, indeed, it's a very good morning to you, and I'm coming to you from Kajansi Town Council here in Wakiso District. Actually, behind me is the flyover, actually. And then also, if someone is driving to come through Kajansi and proceed maybe to Munyonyo, Lubo, and the rest of the neighboring places, you may need to either put it in mind that there is a slight jam away from Bwebaja up to here in Kajansi. But it's a beautiful morning. I am here to talk about the budgeting for this town council. It's one of the town councils that are actually big in Wakiso. It's bigger than Makindye, Sabagabo, bigger than Entebbe, but funding priorities to them. They are given 3 billion shillings to allocate to different sections, including health, road infrastructure, education, among the rest. But I just want to speak to the mayor of Kajansi to just tell us exactly what were their priorities to the 3 billions that they were given. Maybe in Twebirara, Ebiri Munobotumanyi Kajansi, Ntikati connecting Kumpigi, Ngoise Wali, Kasanje, Nebitundu Ebirara. Atubulire, sente billion bumbi busatu, bichi byemu mwazitegekede naye zibamala katoneke sebo
neyanza nnyo erinnya lyange nze Kayondo Ndawula Albashir Mayor Kajansi Town Council. Sente zino nga bw'omanyi tubeerako ne sente eza local revenue ne tubeerako ne central transfers. Naye mu kusinziira ku sente ezituweebwa naddala okuva mu central transfers, sente zetwandiise eza road fund, Kajansi teweereddwa mukisa kubanga ye town council esinga obunene mu Uganda yonna, with 62 cells with 11 wards. Ekitundu bwe kibanga kirina emiruka 11 nga kirina ebyalo nkaaga mu bimeka mu bibiri, ng'ate ebyalo ebimu olaba nti biki bigazi nnyo naye nga byetaaga
ekisinga okuba n'obwetaavu mu Kajansi, ebyenguudo ebyaki?
Mu kusinziira ku kiriwo mu budde buno, enguudo ze zisinga okubeera obwetaavu, si Kajansi yokka ne bw'ebeera ekitundu ekirala kyonna, kubanga enguudo zibeeranga bw'olaba omutima mu muntu nti buli kintu kyonna, connectivity yonna eyita ku luguudo, ayagala okufuna obujjanjabi, ayagala ogenda kusomera, buli bizinesi yonna etambula na nguudo.
Mwalinayo budget ya sente
mu mwaka oguwedde guno gwennyini road fund yatwa milioni 160 mu emu, milioni 160 nga bw'obalabalamu nga tulina 300 kilometrage